Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Imagine if the soul wrote a set of manuals for navigating the human condition as we move through these difficult times. Well, stay tuned, because today's conversation is going to be the first of 3 deep discussions about a remarkable trilogy of books, the Self-Realization series, which is already being compared to 2 other seminal works, Conversations with God and A Course in Miracles, which decades after their publication are still shifting and transforming the lives of millions of people worldwide. My guest is publisher of 1111 magazine, host of 1111 Talk Radio, and the author of multiple award-winning books on love, inspiration, and oneness, SIMRAN Singh. Now, before we begin, it's important to know that the deeply personal stories you're about to hear are being shared not for sympathy, but as an example of the human spirit and how the individual journeys that we have through the wounds that we all accumulate are part of the Dharma that we end up playing out if we're willing to really do the work to see what's going on inside. and as the experience of the soul's desires in understanding all levels of expression, emotional, mental, and physical, as an incredible opportunity for the true beauty of humanity to emerge. Simran Singh, welcome and thank you for joining us.
It is always a delight to be with you, Sandie, and this is particularly poignant because we are dear friends and you have witnessed this cycle that I have been through at a very intimate space of both the personal level as well as what it has resulted in on a professional level. So thank you for this deep conversation.
You're so welcome, Simran. My job is all about stories. And as I've said many times, we all have stories. We all have tremendous stories. But your story is a bit of a standout story, as our audience is going to discover. And yes, I have been there throughout it. And I've been blown away, gobsmacked, as we say in England, at the courage and the stick with itness. I mean, more than anything, to stick with the journey of, as you call it, kind of dissolution of everything for 7 years is more than I think I could ever do, and many others too. But tell me, before we start talking about the books, or about the one in particular that we're going to be discussing today, I want to know more about the story, and I also want to know about these sevens that keep appearing on the covers behind you, the 7 blessings of human experience, the 7 illusions, the 7 human expressions of grace, which is what each of the 3 books are built around. So tell me the significance of 7.
The 7 is as multidimensional an experience as the books are. So at the very highest level, 7 is a highly spiritual cosmic number. It is the subtle, the sacred, the holy, the allness and the isness that we each are that is trying to unfold from within us and using everything around us to help us get there. The 7 also represents what I term living, and that is our cycles of experience. We go through these cycles of 7 years that are the unfolding and the spiral of experience that grow us in consciousness as well as deepen us inside, more of an involution experience. And then the third area where the 7 connects to happens to be age 0 to 7. It is the age stage that is most important, most critical in the unfolding of our lives and every moment that we encounter. And finally, the 7 represents the 7-year process that I went through of deconditioning and dissolving that resulted in the information of these 3 books.
Wow. Well, also the fact that you wrote 3 books simultaneously, I mean, as a writer, as an editor, I mean, that's a nightmare. How did you do it?
I never intended to write books. I actually had reached a point during that 7-year process where I had no inspiration left to inspire anyone. I had no intention or desire to do anything in the world. I simply wanted to be with where I was. But the tables of contents streamed into me at one point during a meditative process. And I knew exactly what the table of contents meant because I was living it. I was being it. I was knowing it. I was embodying the very steps that had streamed through. And when I got to the point of completing the 7 years and getting back up because my body told me I was complete, at that point, I felt the impulse that this information needed to be written down because it truly is the manual that the soul would have written and placed with us when we were born, when the stork brought us, had there been a set of manuals to truly help us understand our multidimensional beingness that we are inside.
Wow. Well, it seems like the soul certainly did give us the manual through you, and it's been with you all of your life. I mean, in order to, we know there are many stories behind this, so why don't you just start at the beginning? Because that's what brought you here to this moment in time, isn't it?
It really is, and it goes back to that 0 to 7 age stage. And I would say everyone needs to really look at that age stage for themselves, because every step and action and creation, every choice in our lives stems from the childhood wounding, the reactivity of that childhood wounding that we spiral forward in cycles of 7, which I called echoes, I became aware of 3 specific incidences that really were the reason that I ended up in the 7-year situation that I encountered. I had done a lot of work in the spiritual field. I had created a lot of beautiful things, but ultimately everything went back to these 3 incidences. The first one was when I was 3 years old. My parents had moved to this country, moved to South Carolina, and had settled in a small town, but they were unable to find a place to live. Wherever they would go, they were kind of turned away because we were Indian, because we were brown-skinned. Luckily, we were able to befriend a doctor in the town who was very, very kind. And so he supported my parents in finding a home, and we moved in. And that night, he came and knocked on the door, and he told my parents that we had to move out, that the people who owned the home didn't want to rent to us. So we packed our things and left, and the next day he had a key to another house. The next day, the same thing happened. And then he came back a third day, and he said, I have a third home. This one you will be able to stay in, but there are 3 conditions that you have to abide by. The first is that you have to buy the home from the mill, and when you're ready to leave it, you have to sell it back to the mill. The second condition is that there can be no alcohol anywhere on the property or ever consumed on the property. And the third condition is you are not allowed to have any Black person in your home or on your property. That particular incident, as a 3-year-old, I soak up that energy and the feeling of the constant in and out of homes. It left me in a place of not ever really feeling at home in my own skin. Energetically, I took on what my parents were feeling in their sense of having to be stressed about moving and not being able to reside somewhere and feel anchored and rooted. So that's where the initial unsettling and lack of rootedness and search for home began within me. That was followed by a second incident at 4 years old. My grandmother had collapsed in India, and they discovered that she had a tumor on her spine. So my parents brought her to the United States to get treatment. And they discovered that she had leukemia, and she ended up becoming a paraplegic. And she would stay home with me, or rather I would stay home with her while my parents went to work, and we would keep each other company. But because she couldn't do much and she couldn't speak English, we were together all of the time. And I would get up and get the sandwiches and the milk from the refrigerator that my parents had created every day and get our lunch ready. One particular day, the doorbell rang. And so I went to the living room and I opened the front door just slightly to peek at who was outside. And all of a sudden, this wave of fear washed over me. I didn't know what fear was. I just know that I felt something very heavy, and it was very oppressive. And so I hid behind the door just a little bit more, but it was shocking because on the other side of that door was a little 6 or 7-year-old blonde-haired boy. And he was crying and he was panting from running. He was red-faced. His hair was matted to his head from the sweat and the tears. And he was moving his feet, kind of shuffling as if he had to go to the bathroom. And I opened the door a little bit more and I noticed he had something in his hands. And I couldn't quite tell what it was. And when I looked down at his hands, he yelled at me and he threw the object at me. And what he yelled at me was, I don't want you to burn in hell. I don't want you to burn in hell. Take this and save yourself. And he ran away and I never saw him ever again. And I leaned over and I picked up the item that he threw at my feet. And it was this tiny little green book that had squishy paper that was almost see-through, that made noise when you shuffle the pages. But I couldn't read at 4. I didn't know what it was, but I certainly didn't want to burn in hell. And so I went and I placed that book under my pillow in my room. And I left it there. And that night, my mother came to me and she was tucking me in and she shuffled my pillow a little bit under my head. And the book fell to the floor and she picked it up and she flipped through it. And as she did so, I could feel her sadness. I watched her face and her eyes change. And then she looked at me and she asked me what had happened in kind of a stern tone. I could also feel the rage or the anger that was boiling underneath her from what had just occurred. And her tone scared me a little bit, so I told her everything that had happened. And she did a big sigh. And then she placed the book on my heart, and she placed both hands on top of the book and placed her hand on top of mine. And she said, "This is a sacred text. It is the Gideon Bible. It's a Christian Bible. And within it, there are a lot of stories. There are some things that are made up, and there are pearls of truth that will guide you. In our holy book, there are a lot of stories. There are some things that are made up, and there are pearls of truth that will guide you. I want you to learn all the religions. I want you to visit all the churches as you grow up, because what you will find is they all have stories. They all have things made up, and they all have pearls of truth. Follow the pearls of truth." That felt like love. In that moment, I felt this wave of compassion and love and a oneness that was so directly opposite that of the fear and the separation of the young child. But what that moment did is it left a split inside of me, this divide where I was trying to reconcile the fear and the hate and the upset of this child and the compassion yet grief of this mother. And that, I think, is where my journey into spirituality really began. That's where the choice came from. It was this desire to reconcile these two divides that had now separated me inside, and continue to pursue this longing for home that my 3-year-old self had been feeling. So now I even felt more separate.
Yeah.
Then
there was
go
a
ahead.
third one.
There's a third
How
one.
old were you when the third one occurred?
The third one happened when I was 7 years old. And this was an incident that happened with my sister, who was 4 years old. So our childhood stories don't always have to be ones of wounding. Sometimes they can be the opposite, and they'll still create the echoes. And this is a beautiful example of this. In this small town, the big event that would always happen with the school was the Little Miss Beauty pageant. And my mother wore a sari. She was trying to fit in. She taught at the public schools, and the teachers there said, "You really should enter your daughters into this pageant. It's what we all do. It's an annual event. It'll be fun for them. It'll help you fit in." So she placed us both in the pageant. My sister was in the wee Little Miss, and I was in the Little Miss portion, divided into age groups. And so we got to practice, we got to get these poofy dresses, we got to wear a little bit of makeup. It was a lot of fun going through the rehearsals. And then the night of the pageant came. And we went through everything in the pageant just like we did in rehearsals. And we got to the point where we had done all of the first part of the pageant, and it was about time for intermission. So we went off the stage. But the teachers, rather than taking us all to the classrooms to wait until intermission was over, they gathered everyone around and they rearranged us. And at first I thought they were rearranging us by height, but it was not until I got on stage that I realized how they had exactly rearranged us. So they sent us back out right before intermission, all age groups combined together. And there we were standing in a line. And I looked to my right, and there were all the beautiful little black girls. And I looked to my left, and there were all the beautiful little white girls. And I thought, that's odd. My sister and I are the brown ones. We're like a crayon box going from light to dark. And I sat there, and I saw my parents sitting in the third row from the front, and I waved at them and I smiled. And then all of a sudden, the MC started speaking. And she said, "Would Nikki and SIMRAN please come to the front of the stage?" My heart leapt, Sandie. I thought, oh my goodness, we're being recognized out of all these beautiful girls. No wonder they put us in the middle. They're recognizing us. We've done something. We've won something. So I grabbed my sister's hand and we walked to the front where the MC is. And she looks down at us, and I'm looking out at this crowd. It is filled. This gymnasium is packed. Grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles and kids, and so many people that there's standing room only at the back because all the bleachers are filled. And she looks at us and says, We are here to celebrate a Black queen and a white queen, and you two are neither. So we're going to have to disqualify you from the pageant. Please take these coloring books and crayons, and thank you for being here. And she kind of shoved them into my hands, and she nudged us off stage, and I was stunned. I looked out at the crowd, and I saw people whispering, leaning over. I saw my parents' faces, and the smile that was there was gone. I saw people somewhat laughing and talking. And at that point, she kind of grabbed my arm and she said, "Go on now, go on, we're done." And I was shuffled off the stage. And then the rest of the girls that were behind us, they were brought off the stage as well. But we weren't just allowed to go off the stage and away back to our parents. She kept my sister and I there because my sister was to perform during intermission. So she had to go back on stage afterward to perform, but they needed me to stay with her because she was only 4 years old at the time. And so they brought her back on stage, they announced her, and she began to sing her song. And the irony was the song that she sang. So while she begins singing, there's a tape that begins playing in my head. You're not good enough. You're not beautiful. You'll never fit in. You're not like these people. They don't want you here. That's what started imprinting, which is what happens to all of us as children. Mm-hmm. We begin to play a tape in our heads. So my sister's on stage and she begins singing the song. And the song is, "This land is your land, this land is mine." And so after this situation happened, she's singing this very patriotic, beautiful song. And she completes with her little bowl haircut and her floral dress with the crinoline underneath. She looks adorable. And when she finishes, the crowd cheers. They clap. They stand. They think it's wonderful and it's beautiful. And she's twisting and turning on the stage, just joyful at the attention. And in her mind, I imagine the tape that started playing was, "I am loved. I am accepted. People applaud for me. Huge audiences cheer for me and chant for me." And that is the tape that started playing in her head. So this is also an illustration of how two individuals in the same family will now start off of two different trajectories in life. Mm. I became the introvert. My sister became the extrovert. I became the person that followed tradition and followed more of an oppression because that became my subconscious thought pattern. My sister became a public figure. She went on to become the first female Indian 2-time governor of our state, and then on to become the ambassador of our nation, and may go further than that. And that's what began at the age of 4 with that celebration. Yeah. Now, we both had incredible lives, and we both learned and done incredible things. The beauty of it is the contrast here. The amazing way that our souls have created the steps for us to go out into the world to create, to reconcile, to go back, to try to understand our first 7 years of life, because those 3 incidents would shape every single choice and experience that would come.
And the experiences that came were really challenging experiences. You had a very unhappy arranged marriage. You lost your self-esteem. You lost yourself. You developed shame and guilt and blamed yourself for everything that went wrong. And then you had to leave that marriage.
It was an interesting experience of being an empath and being someone that really wanted to please my parents and was so quiet and shy and afraid of the world. After those 3 incidences, I really became afraid of people. Mm. I was afraid of my own shadow. I was afraid of everything. And so I clung very closely to my parents. And I grew up in the family business and I worked beside them. But I was surrounded by beauty because I was surrounded by the fashion industry. And there was something that happened at age 12 So, you start to see how these start to create these echoes. I was between 11 and 12, and something happened with my older brother. And that's when I decided I would have the arranged marriage. I made the decision, the conscious decision, okay, Lord, just send me a Prince Charming and I will marry him. I don't need to know him. I will show up at the right time in the right place, and it will be the most beautiful, glorious marriage ever. So I followed that Indian culture and tradition out of really more fear than it was loyalty. But there was also this loyalty to our culture that I wanted to stay on.
Yeah, yeah. Out of your pain and your misery, you had an experience that led to you completely without any experience at all, producing a very successful 1111 magazine. We don't have too much time to go into that now, but I know that that was a really pivotal moment for you. That was a kind of almost like the phoenix rising from the ashes for a while there. You had your independence, you were creating something really beautiful. You were on your spiritual path. You were experiencing transformations. And you went out on your Rebel Road tour, which was an incredibly brave thing to do for 11 months, taking an RV around the country and just stopping at places and, standing up in front of people and entertaining and telling stories, doing whatever you felt inclined to do. But it was after that you had another huge challenge in your life. We've only got a few minutes before the break. Could you quickly just tell us about that challenge? Because I think that also is pivotal to what came after.
Absolutely. And I would like to add that, in 2008, which was one of the ripples from the earlier childhood experiences, creating 1111 and doing all the work that I did from that time, it felt like light. It was beauty. It was me creating beauty during immense pain in my life and immense conflict and dysfunction. And so I thought I was creating beautiful light, and I did, but I came to realize that was artificial lighting, because the resulting experience after the Rebel Road was one in which all of the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, the emotional abuse that I had endured in the arranged marriage culminated in me leaving that marriage and divorcing, but then turning around and having the children taken away from me without any reason, shape, or form. It made no sense. There was no due process. And it left me on the floor wondering, what had I done? There were two things that occurred. Number one, I realized I create my reality. So how did I create this? And number two, I knew how much work I had done as inner work. So there had to be something the universe wanted to show me. Once again, I was at a divide. This or that, fear or love. And that's what made the choice to stay down and go through the process.
Yeah. And that was just the beginning of what was going to be years upon years upon years of a nightmare process. What is it, 9-10 years?
It actually was, it's 8 years now. It's going on 9 years, yes.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go to break now, and when we come back, if you could just finish off that piece of the story, and then let's talk about the books, how they came about, and especially book one, which is Living. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is publisher of 1111 magazine, host of 1111 Talk Radio, and the author of multiple award-winning books on love, inspiration, and oneness, SIMRAN Singh. And we're talking about her new trilogy of books on self-realization, living, being, and knowing. After the break, SIMRAN will give us a peek into book one, Living, 7 Lessons of Human Experience. Stay tuned.
Om Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. Simran Singh, tell us what happened during those years that led to the creation of these books.
So as I said before, the work I had done prior, when this took place, I was on my knees. The biggest thing someone could do was remove my children from my care and leave me with no rights to them, hardly ever seeing them. It was devastating to me. And so I knew that the universe was trying to show me something. And the question popped up inside of me of, can you devote yourself as deeply to the darkness as you have to the light? Because there's gold in there. And if you're willing to stay with the process, will you just stay in this place until the end? To whatever end it's going to bring, just stay there because there's something that you're going to learn. And so I decided to stop everything. I stopped all my work, my radio show, my magazine, everything, strictly to feel. And I've always had two intentions, Sandie. One, I didn't realize I had, and that was the byline that came with 1111 magazine when I was downloaded in 2008 to create that magazine. And that byline was devoted to the journey of the soul. I didn't realize that unconsciously that has always been the impulse that's been guiding me to do work that truly is devoted to the journey of the soul. The second thing that has always been a more conscious intention is I just wanted to feel. I had become this robotic, numb individual because of all of my experiences. I could work very hard. I could create beautiful things, but I had a challenge connecting with people. I couldn't feel emotion anymore, and I just wanted to feel. Well, the universe brought me the perfect experience because I felt in waves and waves and waves. The grief was intense, and it went on for years. And I discovered not just my grief coming through me, but when that paused, I began to grieve the grief of my ancestry, my mother, my grandmother, others in my lineage that had also lost their children. I was shown the images and the feelings that they had held down. And when that paused, I began to grieve the emotion of grief that is held in the world that's not being allowed or recognized and felt. And so I chose to really stay in this place of complete feeling. And as I did so, I began to discover a cycle of unorthodox blessings that we all go through that I was following. And that each of these blessings had 7 layers of multidimensionality that we are here to experience. And if willing to stop and pause and stay still, I would discover the illusion, the deeply held, conditioned illusions that I had held in my body, in my physiology from 0 to 7, that would allow me to rise to a higher octave of humanity at some point. And that is the ultimate purpose of these books. They're not about my story. That really is irrelevant. It's not even important. What's important is that other individuals place their story in this material, go through these books very, very slowly, not reading more than a few lines, a paragraph, or a page daily, and allow this to work within you so that you don't have to go through a 7-year process to get where I got, but where you can have your own enlightenment just by facing the life that you're living.
But how on earth did you manage to cope for 7 years? I mean, 7 years in grief, in pain, in sorrow is just, it's harrowing.
You know, that's not anything that quote unquote a sane person would do. So people would say, you've got to be nuts to do that. Who wants to feel that much pain and that much grief? But the thing is, I had to feel what was there. And I knew that anything external is always distraction. I think that that's the thing that people don't realize is when those emotions start to come up just in everyday life about something, we just distract ourselves. We go and do something. We go and project onto someone else. We go and decide to create something or build something. But when have we been taught to just be with ourselves? Because if we do that, all of a sudden we begin to realize that we are nothing more than a conditioned identity. That's not the true us. We keep saying we're here to be more of who we are, but what we're becoming is more of who the ego wants to be. We're not becoming more of what we really are. In order to do that, we must dissolve and disintegrate everything that has built up over time, everything that initially started and rests within the physiology from 0 to 7. That is what we are here to get to. And only stopping will actually get an individual there, which is part of the reason why the pandemic was actually a very spiritual experience for all of us to go through, because it did get people to a point where they did have to feel. Now, what they did with that, I don't know. Some may have run from it. Some may have delved into it and gotten depressed. Others got busy and decided to use the time to create a lot of stuff. But ultimately, it was meant for us to feel. Nature was trying to support us.
Yeah, and we're seeing now with so many people choosing not to return to their jobs, how that has turned out for many. You know, people have explored things that they may never have explored before. So you talk about the 7 blessings of life that serve as secret passageways to personal empowerment, spiritual growth, and our highest potential. Name those 7 blessings.
Absolutely. What my desire is for everyone is to reframe these types of things. We've been taught to stay away from conflict, to stay away from obstacles, to try to fix things or move on. And these are actually the places that we grow the most. They are the openings and the portals, the wormholes that will take us to higher dimensions of consciousness and higher octaves of experience and expression. And it starts with the blessing of life. That's the very first one that we have. We came here for this dualistic contrast experience. That's not going to change, but who we are within the experience will change as we move through these upward spirals of blessings. So there's the blessing of life. There's the blessing of challenge. There's the blessing of conflict. Once conflict happens, usually what ensues is the blessing of chaos. After chaos, there's more obstacles. So the blessing of obstacles. Then we will encounter the blessing of darkness. And finally, the blessing of death. And the blessing of death is not necessarily physical death. It is the death of identities. For us to be the allness of who we are, we have to continuously shed identities so that we dissolve into nothing and no one. In becoming nothing and no one, all of a sudden, we are able to become everything and everyone. That is where compassion actually flowers. That is where unity rests. That is where oneness is held, because then we can come back with the type of identity that instead of the ego using us, we now know how to use the ego. And that's the flip side of what occurs when we become nothing.
Well, that's at odds with what many spiritual teachers who teach about non-dualism are saying, that that's what we need to embrace. But you're saying, no, we've got to reframe duality. We need it because there's something there for us.
It's part of our oneness. Our darkness is part of our oneness. And until we're willing to embrace all of that and really look at ourselves as all dimensions occurring at the same time, we cannot fix the split that's external. Separatist consciousness exists first on the inside, which is why I wrote the book the way I did, which is why I have you, self, repeatedly throughout the book.
Yeah, say more about that, because that is a curious thing that I think many people will wonder about. You're referring to different parts of us, aren't you?
I am, because we're so focused on just the identity. You know, it's very easy for me to focus on being SIMRAN, the 1111 magazine publisher, or the radio host, or the author, and just live my life from that place. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not present to the other parts of me that are operating at the same time, creating at the same time, then I'm really separated from the 2/3 of myself. And it's only when I bring all of me to every experience Will I actually bring the full open heart? Will I bring the true full voice that is mine to share as my piece of divine oneness? That is when I bring oneness and wholeness. Living the 7 blessings of human experience represents the capital S self, the capital SELF. And that's representative of the asleep, unconscious conditioned part of us, the homogenized, the dream walker, the one that's adorned in all kinds of identities and masks, that's trying to make sense of life and is really living reactively from their childhood wounds. The second book, being the 7 illusions that derail personal power, purpose, and peace, is the lowercase self, SELF, or lowercase u, YOU. And that is the part of us that is the shadow, which many people have delved into that work. But when we go deeper than the shadow, we touch the animal, which is this feral creature, which is this instinctual creature, which is this intuitive creature. And when we get to be comfortable in the skin of the animal, then we deepen even further into the monster. And we end up realizing that we've been unconsciously obedient to these expressions, which is why life goes gray or why we feel numb or deeply distracted. And we start to realize that we're possessed by our own inner demons that is having us react in that way. And that leads us into discovering and expressing the capital SELF, or the capital YOU. And that is the humanity. That's the third book, Knowing the 7 Human Expressions of Grace, which is that return to humanity. And it portrays that devotional side, that willingness to feel everything and all things, because the soul came here to experience. And whether it is conflict or whether it is a win, it is experience. And when we can hold it in that place of neutrality, then we can live our humanity to its fullness.
So, as all of this is unfolding, are you having all of these insights and ahas and responding to them? Or did you only have them when you started writing the book and basically processing the process that you'd gone through?
I was deeply, completely present to feeling. There was no thinking going on whatsoever. And there, I don't even know that there was awareness, because that also takes you away from presence. Like the moments are really a distraction from what just took place. And so what I knew to do was just to be present moment to moment. And if that meant crying, I would cry. If it meant screaming, I would scream. If it meant being numbed out and depressed and hopeless and despairing and not wanting to be here, I let myself be there. If it meant having a happy moment, I let myself have it. I did not let my ego self pull me into impulses of go write a book, go create something. Oh, you need to get busy. Or what other people would say, which is, you know what, get on with life. You've been in this long enough. You need to go do something. I was not going to listen to anyone's projection. I was only going to listen to my body, because my body would tell me whether I could work or not. My body would tell me whether I could get up or not. And the moment my body said, you are complete, that was when all of a sudden the writing started. And I decided, okay, I will write these. I understand now why I went through what I went through. And this is valuable information, not only for individuals, but more so for the collective healing of our planet. Going through these 3 books in a very slow way will help every individual dissolve their identities, go through the disintegration process in a very safe and gentle manner, so that they don't have to go through 7 years like I did, but they will be brought more present. They will be slowed down.
Do you regard these as channeled books?
I don't, because I fully experienced everything that I wrote about. They're written in a style that may sound channeled to a lot of people, but it is the aspect of my humanity. It is my humanity speaking. It is all of me speaking at the same time that wrote these books. And so it just depends on the individual as to whether or not they feel like it needed to be a channeled text to believe it or not. But it was a very human experience.
Wow, a human experience with a very multidimensional interpretation in many ways.
And it brings multidimensionality inside rather than outside. Because again, we keep trying to project everything externally, Sandie, and there's no one here. There's just one here, and it's you. And so all that multidimensionality has to be going on inside this universe, not outside in a universe we've projected. And I think that's the key, is if we can really move from that place and understand how our projections outside are such a self-absorbed way of living, that when we really turn inside and devote ourselves to the inner work, that's actually the opposite of self-absorbed. That is sacred activism. That is true service to humanity. That will ripple out into the world and make change in ways that our mind and our ego cannot comprehend.
I've heard that these books are very triggering.
They do trigger people because they are meant to face parts of themselves they didn't want to face. And even the languaging sometimes, it will trigger people to see the three words written together, the you, or the self. And the reason that I did that, or was guided to do that, was it slows you down to bring you more present. And it keeps reminding you that there's more to you than you let be active. And when you can have an active state of listening to all aspects of you, then all of a sudden you can become that active state of listening to everyone in our world. Those that are going through war, those that are homeless, those that are achieving a win. Everybody will be seen, heard, and acknowledged fully because you've seen, heard, and acknowledged yourself fully. Until then, all of those words like compassion and love and unity and oneness, they're just empty words.
Yeah. There isn't anything about these books that one would say is normal. From the way you wrote them, the way you received them, the way they're being published, 3 of them being published, bang, 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 one after the other, all within the space of a short period. That doesn't normally happen.
No publisher. So the fact that that even happened is kind of insight into the universe really wanted these books out. And you and I both have done radio and magazine for so long. We've read so many books that I know there's no books out there like this. This is completely different material.
No, absolutely. So usually what happens, as with the books that I mentioned, A Course in Miracles, Conversations with God, any groundbreaking book takes a time to get going. It's hard for people to, it's very much a word of mouth thing. It's that grassroots build up. How did you get a publisher to see immediately what you were doing here and say yes?
When I started writing these, I made a declaration to the universe that I would write them, that I had agreed to go through the 7-year process, and that I would write the books, but I would not go look for a publisher. I would not go searching for anything. There was nothing inside me that wanted to fall into that drive, masculine, pushy way of the world. And so I stayed present to writing as my next step. And I was invited to a speaking engagement in 2019 at the UN and also at FIT, where I was an alumni student. And as I went to do that talk, the librarian that had invited me, she said, I think I'm supposed to introduce you to someone. I keep getting that I'm to introduce you to a publisher. And I said, okay. And I just left it at that. And it was about a year later, there was an email that introduced me to someone else. And the publisher said, we've heard nice things about you. Doesn't look like you've been doing anything for quite a while. What are you working on? So I replied back to him and I said, I have 3 books that I've written. They need to come out close together, which I know is something publishers don't do, but they're very powerful work. And he said, I'm not interested in 3 books. I'm interested in 1 book. And so he said, send me a book synopsis. And I sent him that. But at the bottom of it, I put a description of the other 2. He called me the next day. We want all 3 of these books. And yes, they need to come out simultaneously. The universe will use us. And so much of this experience, Sandie, was about me being willing to trust, to sit back and trust that I'd be taken care of monetarily, to sit back and trust that I would still have a life after this, to sit back and trust that all of this had meaning and purpose, to trust that I would not dissolve into the kind of shadowy nothing that disappears in oppression, but I would dissolve into the radiant nothingness of sacred ecstasy. And so for us to be able to begin to trust life, we will start to rebalance our masculine and feminine energies and become more neutral about the world and more natural, so that we reclaim our humanity rather than being these conditioned, homogenized humans that we've all become, that are, regardless of whether in the spiritual world or the business world or the political world, hamsters on a wheel.
Well, we have to know the latest update on the story with your children, because you have, fought for many years in courts. It's been a constant battle, and you have made some incredible inroads there that I think everybody should hear about. So tell us the latest state and what was really going on there.
Well, as I went through the process, not understanding why this had happened to me, a new set of attorneys actually came to me and they said, "Your case is really odd. We'd like to know more about it." And as they started fighting my case, because I knew my job was to stay present to the inner work, that I had to trust them to do what they knew how to do, because that's not my world. What uncovered was a 12-year cottage industry at the time of an underground way of basically selling children to the parent with more money. And it was a group of attorneys throughout the state that have basically round robined wins for people, and it has all been done outside of the court system's purview. By doing so, what they've done is they've taken away children's rights, they've taken away women's rights. It has happened to some fathers as well, and they've taken away due process. So I was able to make it all the way to the appellate and the Supreme Court. And in both cases, the case was won that everything that had happened was in fact illegal. It was unconstitutional and against the rights of children. And it is now upheld as a law in the state of South Carolina, so that this can never happen to any other family or any other children ever again. And hopefully at some point, there will be also some kind of recompense to the 20 years worth of families now that were treated in the same way as I was and suffered loss and grief in many ways. There were women that I met along the way. Some had turned to prostitution, some had turned to drugs. Most had been bankrupts trying to go through the process. A couple were homeless. So this is something that's rampant. And as I've shared my story a couple of times, I'm finding it's not just in the state of South Carolina. This is throughout the United States. This is in the UK, that this form of illegal arbitration that binds children to another parent and discards one parent is something that is rampant and taking place. And yet at the same time, this divide between man's law and divine law exists. And we are here to be the bridge. We are here to be the part that brings it back together. And that only comes by being willing to be in partnership with the outside, by doing the work on the inside.
Mm. Wow. You have talked about Dharma. You've talked about, our destiny being written on our foreheads. And you believe that our names, have an awful lot to do with the way and the way we name ourselves, the things that we say to ourselves about ourselves as we're growing, all have something to do with this. I mean, the things. So how do you put that together with what you've achieved, what you went through? This was your destiny to create all of this, you believe?
Oh, this is definitely my life's work. I do believe that our dharma rests in our karma. And for me, karma is the energy that is embedded within the body from 0 to 7 that is trying to reconcile itself through us. In the discovery of the many aspects of me, I discovered Simi, or Simi, who was trying to be seen all her life, most importantly by herself. And that was that young child that felt ignored and hidden. And then that became Simran Singh, the reactive part of me that came out to become the spiritual teacher or the writer or all of these things, to try to say, no, that's not who I was. developed this identity of Simran Singh and created beautiful things in the world, wonderful things in the world. And then the onset of losing the identity of mother and publisher and author and all those things being discarded left me at a place of just being Simran or Sim. And that was my humanity. Sim is the capital Y-O-U. She is the one that can stand with anyone going through anything and understand, be unconditional in her loving. And that now brings me to Simran Preet, which Simran means remembrance of the divine as the divine, which is what we all are. And Preet means love. And so I am moving into a place where I recognize all of myself, the you, as Simran Preet, the remembrance of divine love, and knowing that all those aspects of me are operating at the same time and are leading me into my Dharma in the way that I'm meant to express. And that way has no pressure. It has nothing to do with time. It has nothing to do with money. It simply has to do with presence to all of me and bringing that to the planet.
So when you look back now and where you are today, I mean, what do you think? What do you feel? I mean, are you completely now without ego, do you feel?
I don't know that we're ever without ego. I think in the earlier years, my ego was a suppressed, depressed ego in terms of I was this person that didn't want to have an ego. And by not wanting to even have an ego, I was having an ego, which is ironic. I think that my prior life, my ego used me. I am at a point now where I understand how to use the gift of the ego and to use it well and to have my spirit come through me in a way that uses everything for a greater good rather than any agenda or any other reason. And that's part of the reason for these books, particularly book 2. It really helps individuals understand what we need to shift out of in terms of the conditions and the density in order to become a greater sacred activist within ourselves and within the world.
Well, book 2 is the book that you and I are going to be discussing at the second part of this conversation in July, but it actually comes out at the end of May. What else can you tell us about what we will learn from book 2?
Book 2 is about the illusions, the things that we get caught up on as the reasons we can't stop and be present. And there are things like time and money and hierarchy and even evolution, our belief that we have to ascend or get somewhere. And what I want individuals to know is there's nothing to ascend to. What we are here to do is have spirit descend into the body. And the only way that can happen is we have to make space. We have to give ourselves the grace of making space within us for spirit to descend and express through us. And so being is the bridge of these books. And it's, to me, my favorite, the most important one, because it really tells the individual how to do their work, but really let that translate into how the collective ends up shifting because of that work. And it has everything to do with the illusions we believe.
Does the book contain exercises, or is it in the narrative that we begin to really understand? And in that understanding, the transformation begins.
In living, the contemplation of different passages is really what's going to start to do the work within you. There are exercises, there are questions and prompts that will help each individual come to their own awareness. Book 2 is more in line with prayer. There's some deep collective prayers that are inside of that book that once you start to say them and embody them, they really will help to shift our field in a beautiful way. And book 3 is more about the flowering of humanity. It is a visceral, sensorial experience of understanding that we're not these human beings. We are energy. We are just all energy equilibrating itself. And so is every event in our life. And when we can see it from that place, then all of a sudden there's no heat on conflict or chaos. There's really no angst or energy put towards war or peace. It's just all equal. It's energy equilibrating.
So if you were asked to sum up in a few words, a few sentences, the primary message of this book, these books, what would it be?
It would be that there is nowhere you have to go. There is nothing you have to do. That if you are willing to just simply face the life in front of you, particularly the things that feel the most dense, fully and completely, and let them swallow you whole, that your enlightenment is right there. You don't have to do anything else except become present to it. And that will change the world.
Yeah, and that's something that we badly need. So, you know, one often says at the end of an interview, so what are you doing now? But it sounds like what you're doing now is just staying present.
Isn't that the key? That's where we all have to be, is stay present to the moment with what the heart says we are here to be. And being is not sitting still and doing nothing. Being is how we are being, what we are being, and when we are being.
Simran, I think we're out of time now, but thank you for joining us today. Thank you for enduring those 7 years and everything else, and for delivering this work to the world. I have no doubt it's going to be very successful.
Oh, I love you, Sandie. Thank you so much for such a powerful interview and for sharing me so intimately. I deeply appreciate it.
You're welcome. So the Self-Realization Trilogy, Living, Being and Knowing, is published by Schiffer Publishing. And we've been discussing book 1, Living, the 7 Blessings of Human Experience, which is available now. And Simran will be back with me on July the 14th to talk about book 2, Being, the 7 Illusions that Derail Personal Power, Purpose and Peace, which will be released on May the 28th. For more information about Simran and her work, her events, coaching, private sessions, and everything else that she's presently staying present with, visit her website at iamsimran.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Simran.